you want to have a parachute without holes. Like you just don't want to fall to the ground that fast. Like it's all about slowly falling, right? Like surviving
Yeah,
after you jump out of the
not
plane in that
flying.
sense.
If
Yeah.
like
Or
that.
flying or whatever you want to do, gliding, whatever else. But
Yeah, exactly.
the idea is to not hit the ground too fast.
Yeah.
Because you might break a leg or you might even die, right? If you hit the ground too fast.
Hey, I am Sam, your host, and this is Startup Fuck Ups.
Thank you for coming today, and thank you for your time. And again, thank you for the courage of sharing this story. Because as you said, and as many people know, sharing this failure stories is not easy. So
Yeah.
I truly appreciate and I truly admire the strength and the courage that it takes to be here and speak about the failure.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things that you learn is that you got to be able to learn from failures, right? So, as a entrepreneur, like you never stop. It's just like you try one thing, if it doesn't work, okay, you learn that, and then you try again, ideally. Um, I think there's a interesting thing, like it comes to stock investing as well, where you're bound to fail, but just got to make sure that you don't fail so badly that you can't continue working, right? So, in that same sense of entrepreneurship, it's like you're gonna fail, but like just make sure you don't fail like terribly. Fail on purpose, or like make sure that you have a little bit of padding. But yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and recently I read a post from I'm not sorry, Reid Hoffman, and he says that he really likes to make the analogy that starting a new business is like jumping from an airplane and building the parachute on the way down.
Yeah, yeah,
So
very accurate.
mm,
I totally agree on that. That's what happened to me too. So I can say yes, that's absolutely true. You're jumping out of a perfectly fine airplane, right? Like there's nothing wrong with it. You're taking a leap, and then you're gonna try to build a solution as you are falling.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. And even at some point, even if you build a parachute, then you need to start gliding and you need to start flying. So, but that's another story. So so yeah. So, Zapaer, tell me a bit about yourself. Who are you, and what is your background and expertise?
sure. So, well, I'm Zapaer, and I've grown up basically in different parts of the world. So grew up in Berlin, in Toronto, and then also in Abu Dhabi, and then I came back to Montreal for university. So I've been around. Originally, I'm an Uyghur, so we're from East Turkestan. Currently, it's supposed to be an autonomous region in China, but it's facing genocide. But that's another topic. So, very like heavy. Like I'm sure you, as a Venezuelan, you can kind of relate. It's like when government really doesn't do its job and is terrible. Um, so we have a same issue over there. So I grew up abroad and I came to Montreal at McGill University, materials engineering background. And I started a company called Z3D in 2015. So mid 2015 at, sorry, 2015, like from there onwards, like it started from there onwards, but I think it went for 2 years and then I closed it down. I, wrapped up the operations basically at that point. Um, yeah, so that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, that's great, and yeah, I can completely relate with you, like with the situation. You know what?
Crazy, yeah.
It's really interesting because my previous guests are all
Mhm.
friends from Venezuela.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I don't know if it has something to do like having to face a lot of the things about your government and about leaving your country and needing to move abroad that gives you this want to speak about this, but I don't know.
Yeah, hey, I mean, I think another thing is immigrants are much more scrappier than other people. So, like, in that sense, that they're willing to try things and, they come in, they take a risk by even leaving a country, and then they're starting out, they do what it takes to basically survive in another country. And that kind of is like entrepreneurship too, right? So, you have that spirit of taking risks and whether they like it or not, right? Like, you have to try. So,
Yeah.
but yeah.
And definitely it is about that. It's about taking risks and jumping out of that perfectly plane that you're flying just comfortable there. But yeah,
Absolutely.
so you told me you were from North Uzbekistan.
No, East Turkestan.
Okay,
It's
I'm
close to Uzbekistan, but so the like it's really actually called Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region
oh,
by the Chinese government, but we call it East Turkestan as a
East
like
Turkestan.
yeah, exactly.
All right, good. And what does entrepreneurship culturally mean there? What is the culture about that?
Yeah, so it's the region is actually where it used to be the old Silk Road. So all of the trade used to go through there. So historically, there's a very, I guess, like strong trade and business-oriented mindset in that region. And that's how the entire region kind of flourished. Like there's not at that time, like there was a lot of resource extraction. There was other things. Like historically, it was just a place of trade, right? It was taking caravans coming through, and you're making money based on the people who are coming through. So a lot of business orientation there. And but internally, as a person myself, like my family is very academic oriented. Like it wasn't very business, like
Okay.
like I don't come from a long line of entrepreneurs. So it's a new, different environment. It's something that was not something you haven't like I had in mind of doing when I was younger, right? Like when you're thinking about it, like nobody says I want to be an entrepreneur. Maybe that's changed with the generation now, but and then the usual the perception of what people think entrepreneurs are is you're basically unemployed and looking for a job, right? So what do you say when you're self-employed? It's like, yeah, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a self-employed. And it's like, okay, yeah, you're looking for a job, yeah. And that's the mindset behind it. But I think Canada is very different on that. I think
Okay.
it's much more open to entrepreneurship. I think from other regions I've seen, Abu Dhabi is also one of those countries where they're very much driven to, like international investment and having these encouraging their people to kind of start businesses, and it's a land of commerce. So that's what they try to project, right? At least.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have different exposures, but I really got interested in entrepreneurship after coming to Montreal.
Okay. Makes sense. No, that is really interesting. And for example, um, uh, the other guests have spoken to me about, in Venezuela, of course, about the reality that there,
Mhm.
since the crisis is that big, entrepreneurship becomes the main mindset. Like to survive and to
Yeah.
really face what you need to do, like there's no good paying job or something that can generate enough income to pay
Mhm.
for the food and pay for the medicine that you need to do. So everyone needs to be an entrepreneur in its own way. And of course, it's an entrepreneurship with no strategy, with no business and financial planning. They are just going out and selling what they can do, or sell, or buying and selling. So
Right.
yeah, that is at least like from Venezuela, and even from lower income classes to middle classes. That has been like the thing in the past.
Yeah, I think that's a lot more like it's rough, right? So I mean, I think that's more of a survivalist nature. Like you do what it takes to make ends meet, basically at that point, right? And because you don't have those um, state companies and like the state employment or like regular employment options, right? Now you're like forced into entrepreneurship, um,
Yeah, exactly.
which is pretty rough. At the same time, like I think in North America, the thing of entrepreneurship is seen more as you're taking a choice, right? Like you're willingly, participating in a risk or to pursue the American ideal of life, like, or the American dream, like you can make it. And then that tends to be nowadays, I think, more through entrepreneurship than like a 9 to 5 job.
Yeah,
It could be for some people like it is a 9 to 5 job, like they can make it, but I think for a lot of people it's more small businesses. Like I think North America overall, 80 to 90% of businesses are small businesses, right? So, and they start through entrepreneurship or startups usually.
yeah, and the way they were doing it, they were, perhaps they were not aware that they were doing an entrepreneurship. They were just like, hey, I want to start a new business, and because I don't like to have a boss, or either I like to have something of my own. Maybe I like to be my own boss. So yeah, most likely that's how many of those stories have started.
Yeah, and I think so. It's not as, but let's say it's a very different situation than for Venezuela, but I think North America basically there's still wealth inequality, right? So
Yeah.
there's terrible wealth inequality. So you have like very big disparities between the lowest like socioeconomic like wealth status to like the 0.01%, like they own significant portion of wealth, right? Um, and I think the way that also taxes are kind of work, like the way it is, people tend to prefer to do entrepreneurship maybe than like work a 9 to 5 job because of the tax structure. If you're working for yourself, you have more deductibles and you save more money. You potential to save more money, right? And you're creating something that's your own, right? So if it works, you have a company which is a pretty good asset if it makes cash for you. So I think there's that appeal for entrepreneurship as well. It's like being your own boss, making your own wealth. Um, but yeah.
Yeah, and that is really interesting because definitely many people might choose this path and perhaps they it doesn't work for them, so they had to face these hardships and now the history it's like another thing. And well, this is why we're here, right? So this is what we're going to talk about. So tell me a bit about the project that you had worked on and what was it?
Sure. So again, 2015 was like an era of 3D printing. I guess that's when it really started to take off.
Yeah.
I think just before that, you had like Stratasys, which was the biggest kind of 3D printing company in the world.
Okay.
And I think that was just at that point where you started to have the hype around, like, oh, you can 3D print anything. Um, but so like the hype was, well, it was basically overvalued because it wasn't really true at that point. And so you started seeing companies like their stocks decline, like Stratasys. I think they like they went from like I think it was like $13 up to like very very low stock value. Just because like the sales weren't there, people weren't able to like find the applications, like what to do with it, and like how you can actually use it in the business. And but at that time, it became accessible enough that you could start buying these kits for like $1,000, and you have this machine at home that can basically, print small things and then small toys or maybe small furniture pieces. So it was very much prototyping at that point, but their company started to come around. I think there was a company called 3D Hubs that came out to support that network of creators around the world. So the idea was you create a supply chain that's decentralized. So you can, have 1,000 businesses, and then you can choose which one's closest to you to make the parts for you, send it to you as quickly as possible for the lowest cost. Um, and that's also when I got involved with it. I started to build a kit through McGill. I learned about 3D printing a bit, designed like how to make it, like what the components are, how to use it, just like a very elementary knowledge at that point. Um, and then I got my first internship working for another startup here in Montreal that was building industrial 3D printers to take on Stratasys, basically, because those machines would cost you $500,000 US. So super expensive. So there's nothing else. That was just like $500,000 US, right? Or you get this really small, barely functioning $1,000 desktop printer, which you can't really do much with. So it's either you spend $500,000 or you spend $1,000 and then you try to, do the consumer market, but it wasn't very lucrative. So basically my class, well, he's like basically in the same like program, but he was 1 year or 2 years ahead of me. He started graduated, he created a company, and then he basically hired me over the summer as an intern, and we were building machines, and so they were doing the Kickstarter. And that's when I really learned about entrepreneurship, how to use a 3D printer, how to make it work as a business. And I was like, okay, this is interesting. Like, so you can take these like machines and you feed them things like plastic, and then you create this part, and then you get paid for it. Okay, that's it. It's wow. Like, hold on, that sounds like a cash making machine. Yeah, because it really was like it came down to a point where per machine you had, if you were able to fill the time, you were making like $3 to $5 an hour.
Whoa, okay.
Yeah, it's not like amazing, but hey, like if you can scale it up, like okay, like you start thinking about okay, like if I have 4 or 5 of these machines, like I'm already making $15 to $20 an hour. That's a minimum paying job, so
Yeah.
not bad. Um, but the thing is, those machines are expensive. But anyway, so after I left that internship, I found this company called 3D Hubs. I don't know if you can see it, but it's this company,
Oh,
3D Hubs. They're still around. They're based in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands, and so this is a company that uses that. Basically, it's the Uber for 3D printing. So
okay.
you have a network. They show you where the different the different vendors are,
Okay.
and then you choose one closest to you, and then you can send them a part, an STL file. You draw, you make a design, you send it to them, and then they print it, send it back to you, and then 3D Hubs they take like 12 15, 12 to 15% like of the profit, right? So they take the money and then the rest goes to you. So basically, they do the marketing, they do the management, the invoices, that kind of stuff for you, and payment, right? So I became a brand ambassador for them
Hmm.
as a student, and one of the requirements was that you had to have your own 3D printer.
Okay.
And so as a brand ambassador, you don't really get paid for it, right? Like it's a volunteer kind of position, but you get certain benefits. And the main thing was that if you were I believe, if you had your own printer shop, like you get some sort of discount or like there are certain benefits with it, right? So that's the way to make the most money. So I was like, okay, well, I need to find a 3D printer. And so I asked my old boss at the internship, I was like, hey, like you have these old desktop machines that you're not using, like, do you want to just give me one or two and like see what happens? And there's really cool about it. He basically gave me a machine for free. I think there's first one machine and then another one later on.
Nice.
And these were the Lulzbot printers. And so these were like pretty workhorse, like American made, um, industrial. Like it's not industrial in its skill, but like it was, you could run it for a long time and not worry about it, which is
Okay.
kind of a special thing at the time itself. If you have a machine that doesn't break down every like 2-3 hours, that was a big thing as well. So this were quite reliable, good to use machines. So I started with that, and then I had one or two machines. I started receiving clients like immediately. Like it was a pretty cool time, and you have to set your own pricing,
Okay.
right? You have to do a little bit of marketing,
Mhm.
and then you have to work a lot of customer service and business to business kind of getting files, making sure that they're actually printable and usable. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of that kind of initial. That was what the business kind of involved. It didn't touch upon, let's say, SEO or Google marketing campaigns.
Okay.
It didn't go that far because we didn't have to do that, like inventory, that kind of stuff. You didn't really have to set that all up. It was very much like, oh, somebody sent me a file, like I can get paid $50 for you know I mean, I personally just have to click on the file, download it,
Mhm.
put it on an SD card, and then push it onto the printer. Because at that time, we didn't even have Wi-Fi. Like, you couldn't send files by one. You have to physically download, like much like a floppy disk, plug it into the 3D printer, and then you press print.
Mhm.
And then you hope that it works. So, because sometimes it wouldn't work because like it's the geometry doesn't work, or like it's too complicated, and then you spend 15 hours working on it, and then you see that it's starting to lift and corners. So
Okay.
then nobody's gonna pay for it because then why it's lifted, it's dimensions aren't right. So then you have to do it again,
Okay.
or you tell them it doesn't work. But so there's a lot of like that figuring it out on the go kind of initiatives, activities that were happening. But yeah, so that's how I started out.
Yeah,
Kind
that's
of accidentally fell into it, I guess, in that sense.
no, that's really amazing, and like I completely understand your fascination about these machines because I mean, isn't the engineer's dream to have something that it creates stuff like you just like, hey, I want to print this, I want to print this doorknob, I want to print this gear, I want to print this. So that's like an amazing dream for engineers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's when you. So this is. I mean, I've been in 3D printing now for like 5 years, so it becomes like boring at that point. It's like, oh yeah, what's the big deal? Like put something on the machine and you get some parts out of it. Like okay, cool, but like, but
Okay.
when it first came out in 2015, like it was once you like understood like the possibilities, it was like whoa, like this is pretty
Yeah.
cool. Like you can design something on your computer, a digital file, right? And then you can make it a reality just like instantly. Like you don't have to wait a week. You have to wait like 3 months.
Yeah.
You just print, and like 3-4 hours later, you have your part in your hand, right? Like
Yeah.
that's you go from digital to physical really quickly.
Yeah.
So that was pretty mind blowing at that time. It's like wow, okay, that's pretty cool.
And
And
yeah, go ahead, go ahead. Sorry.
so as a because until that point, like if you wanted to make something, you would have to go to like a CNC shop, or like you have to basically go to a machinist and tell them, okay, I want to make this. These are my CAD drawings. I want to use this material. Like go, like how much will it cost for me, right? Like is it gonna, or you go injection molding, which will cost like unless you're making millions of them, like or hundreds of thousands, it doesn't really make sense because you're spending $50,000 on just a mold. And that's just for one part. So, like, you have to be really sure that you want to make that part. Um, so for prototyping, that was amazing because you could save cost, you could do it really quickly, and then you could iterate, right? So you can make different iterations, and
Yeah.
so that was that's what people saw in 3D printing initially, I think, prototyping. It's changed a lot since then, but so that was the initial kind of use case scenario for it.
Okay, okay. And from your perspective, how do you believe it is right now? Like, what is the current state of that industry?
Yeah, so I've had the pleasure of like being in the industry for 5 years, and I know people who've been here like 20, 30 years, like who, worked on the first kind of 3D printers ever, which is kind of very interesting, like, powder-based laser. Um, but so for us, it's basically a filament. So filament is like, it's a spool of plastic,
Mm-hmm.
and you just heat it up. It's like basically you have a 3D printer is a glue gun on a XYZ gantry, right? So it's a special glue gun that pushes plastic out and then it moves in a special way, programmed, toolpath. But it's changed from prototyping. It's people then you started to use it for production. So
Okay.
they were making parts, that they can use for, bigger, like maybe 100 parts or like a series of parts, assemblies, to help them make other things, or like as packaging. And then now what we're seeing is more of an end use case scenario where people are using it to make parts that are then directly sent to the client or directly used in an application or on airplanes or as surgical tools, or parts within actual car like dashboards. And it's become more of like, okay, we can um, take this part and actually use it in something, not just to make something or prototype something, right? It's like the process itself creates the part which is then ready for commercial use or industrial use. So that's where it is. And then after that, you're looking at the next kind of future step would be you combine 3D printing with other technologies to create something that's even better than both individually, right? So
Mhm.
people, they take a 3D printed part, they do some special coatings with it, they put some special coatings or they do some sort of layup process, and then you have this, super strong, very useful part that didn't cost you a crazy ton of money or a crazy amount of time to make it. I think that's like what the next feature is. But right now, we're seeing a lot of people who are using it for production. So
Okay.
it's not so much as prototype. There's still a lot of people who are doing prototyping, but
Mhm.
it's now more production, more like business. Like, okay, how do I put this into my supply chain? And then some people who are more advanced, they're using it for end use applications. So they just take the part, they use it for a specific application. So whether that be a dashboard in a car, people, I think it was the U.S. Army, they 3D printed some tires. So these tires, they don't have any air in them. It's just, so you can pierce them and they still work, right? So things like that. You have very specific applications that make it work for 3D printing. And you might ask, like, okay, what changed between prototyping like in 2015 to like now?
Mhm.
It's really the materials. So
Okay.
um,
Okay.
there's innovation in materials, and then to make that possible, you have much more complicated machines who can handle those materials. Because in 2015, when you wanted to do something, it was just PLA. It's like
Okay.
this cornstarch plastic, very brittle. If you leave it in the sun, it will actually start to break. Yeah. So, and now you have, I think I like to show this. It's like you have this different materials. So these are all different materials here. In 2015, you only had like the bottom one, ABS.
Okay.
And then now you have like all of these ones because they're all like high temperature,
Oh.
high performance materials that some of them actually can even replace some aluminum alloys, right? So
Oh.
it's gotten to a point where it's actually usable. So you have Peak, biomedical applications. You have Alta 985. This is used for aerospace. This is actually in space right now in
Oh.
the ISS. They use it for mission critical components like covers, electronic covers,
Okay.
boxes, enclosures, and then you have PEKK, and then carbon fiber PEEK, which is like super strong. And this can, you can put this in an oven at 260 degrees Celsius, and it's still is functional, right? So yeah, it goes, from a material that if you put it in sunlight, it starts to melt to,
Okay.
you can put it in space and it works, right? So that's what changed over the 5 years. But
Yeah,
yeah.
it's really, really interesting because when all of the hype, like 5 years ago, when everything started to like take, because of course this has not been, this has been around for some time. But when I saw it and when the market started to get this desktop machines where you can get that for $1,000, as you said,
Mhm.
what I thought, and my mind went to the medical possibilities to printing human parts. Like that was for me one of the most craziest and most impressive possibilities that you had with the 3D printing industry.
Yeah, I think so. 3D printing is so broad, and I think some businesses call it additive manufacturing as well. So additive manufacturing, 3D printing, like you have metals, you have ceramics, you have bio, like tissues, right? You have plastics, and then you have composites, like there's wood printers, and there's a whole variety. And then that's just like, you're looking at extrusion, you're looking at laser, projector base, like even ice. There's an ice 3D printer, so like.
Okay.
Yeah, so at a university there, at the architecture faculty, the
Mhm.
department there, they built a 3D printer, like a 3D printer for ice sculptures. So you can do
Whoa.
really cool, like, print things with ice, basically, which is in Canada it works because it's super cold. So, you can actually make it work. But so there's a whole variety of different technologies for it. And I think for tissues, for example, is very interesting because, like you mentioned, that um, it started very rapidly, right? It went from 2015, like nobody heard about it, and
Mhm.
then suddenly you have it in your laboratory where you start
Yeah.
seeing universities. They have, oh, we have a tissue 3D printer,
Whoa. Yeah.
right? So, and then it goes up from there. And you also have like food printers. You have printers that can print houses, right? Like cement-based ones. So the industry is very broad. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, of course. No, and it's truly fascinating seeing the evolution of this industry. You started this project like you had this connection. You knew about 3D hubs. You asked for your boss like for the machines that he was not using, so he gave that for you for free. Um, and then how everything evolved. I mean, you started getting clients, and then the months go by, and what else happened?
Yeah. So, I mean, basically those two machines, the one or two machines, like basically the value was like 2 to 4K at that point. So it's like, as a student, like not having to spend 2 to 4K, like that was pretty cool. Like a startup, like not having to spend that money, like seed capital, right? In that sense, it was like I didn't have to spend that money to get started, which is good. Um, and basically, I took out another like I got made a business trip like a loan. Basically, I got like a $500, very small, like just to like play around with it. I was like, okay, give me five. From one of my friends, I told him, okay, give me $500. I'll give you your money back. Like you'll get investment,
Okay.
a good rate of return, and um, and then I basically used that to like buy materials to
Okay.
get the first initial clients and
Mhm.
expand a little bit. And I think I paid him back in like 2 months.
Whoa. Okay.
I was like, here, I gave him like I think it was like $600 or $700 in 2 months. So that's a pretty good deal for him. He was like, yeah, good returns. He was upset that he couldn't stay for longer. I was like, you know what? No, like I don't want to, pay out the profits in the future because like I was like, I'll just give you money back. Here's a bit of money on top, and thanks
Okay.
for your investment. And then like I
Okay.
started doing things myself.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, I think it came to a point where I could make it was I think 15 to $20,000 in profit in a year, which is pretty good.
Yeah.
It was not bad. But that was like with I was running multiple machines. It was like taking up a lot more of my time.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, you could make 15 to $20,000 using 3 or 4 machines if you're running that on 3D hubs, right? So
Yeah.
you could probably, like looking back into it, you probably could have I could have probably made more money. Because what I was doing was very niche. Like it wasn't very niche. It was like literally go online, put my machine
Mhm.
available, and then you get clients. So I mean,
Okay.
if I want to grow it, you could do specialty parts, do like just like collectibles or you know basically you find a product that people are willing to buy, and
Okay.
then you make that product yourself. Like that's the other way people tend to make money. I was just doing it one way, like okay, you send me your files, I'll print it for you, right? And I was exploring different business models. Like okay, I realized that the limiting factor was always the machine time,
Okay.
right? So if you have 3 machines, you can only make a max amount of money. Like assuming that you're using it 100% of the time, you're charging a certain amount per hour, right? So you're kind of limited. You're capped out.
Yeah.
So the way around that is to obviously have more machines, but then the risk is okay. How do you keep up the machine time, right? Like you'll have people times like where you have no machines running because you don't have any jobs. So and
Okay.
that you're not making any money. You're losing money, right? Because you spend money on the machines, like you spend a few $1,000s, and then you're not making much out of that.
Yeah.
So like it would have been smarter to basically take that time that machines are not used and create a part or a product that people can buy that you could just print on your free time, right? So small things. I know people have done like silly things, like they do some stuff like gadgets from TV shows, or they do collectible things like for board games. I know other people who did like stationary things, like for home decoration. So there's a whole different like kind of thing, but that's a whole different business segment because you have to go on Etsy or Shopify. So Shopify wasn't around, I think, at the time, or it was kind of new. So like setting up your own e-commerce store like was another like hassle. Like it was like, how do you do that? Like, do I
Yeah.
have to learn web development? Do I have to like set up a payment store? Like how that's like it took a certain level of knowledge, right? Like it's nowadays like you go on Shopify, 2 minutes later, like you have a website, you can sell t-shirts made in like Colombia or somewhere else, right? Like it's
Yeah.
doesn't have to be like it's you don't have to even make a product. You can just link to from the vendor that makes the shirt to the client and that's it, right? So
Exactly.
but yeah.
That's really interesting. Yeah, that and well, and I mean, for your business making $15,000, $20,000 a year, that's and that is amazing because if you only had like a couple of machines that lying around, and definitely, even if you were not using the machines at every moment, and you
Yeah.
was getting this type of revenue, that's I mean that's great. Those are great
Yeah.
numbers.
So
For
yeah, it was okay for like I think like starting out as a business. So it wasn't that bad. And then so I also put in so I mean the hardware heavy investment like business, right? So whenever you have a business that relies on hardware, you have a lot of capital expenditure, right? So you're buying depreciating assets like these machines are depreciating, and then you're buying these machines for like and I bought all my machines like after the two secondhand. Like I didn't buy a brand new one. Like, and I am very thankful that I didn't buy a brand new one because like the machines that I bought, like even from the secondhand ones, like you had to fix them. You had to like put a lot of elbow grease into it to make it work and to keep it working. Um, because again, the industry wasn't there where you have a reliable business oriented like 3D printer, right? Like it was more like, oh, here's a hobbyist machine. Like you could do cool things with it, right? But it wasn't like, oh, here's a machine that your business can count on, and we're gonna give a guarantee that it will work 90% of the time, 95% of the time. No. And I think you guys said there's a Spanish company that builds 3D printers. They got pretty big recently. I think it's BCN 3D, like the
Okay.
Sigma. So that was interesting. Like they came out, and I think they were one of those kind of machines that were promising exactly that. Like, oh, we're gonna make parts that work for you. The machines are gonna work at 95% of the time. So that was kind of interesting. But those machines were also expensive. Like you're looking at $6,000 to $7,000 for a machine from that. So whereas like at that time you could get machines for $1,000 or less, right? So there was a trade-off. But so I bought all these machines like secondhand on eBay or like Kijiji, and then it's like a Craigslist kind of app. So you like looking through, you buy the ones that you kind of know make sense, and then you have to fix them and then keep them running. That's the idea behind those. And
Okay.
so the issue for me that I realized later on was that I had, let's say, like 8 machines, but they were from like 4 different companies.
Okay. Okay.
So the issue with that is like you have 4 different software, like sometimes you have 4 different settings, you have different spare parts. Because like when you do repairs, you realize, oh, like if this thing breaks, I have to buy like 5, but I can only use, I can only use it on this machine. Like that's
Okay.
not a good value proposition, right? But if you're doing it in the future, maybe somebody's listening to this, like if you want to start up a 3D printing shop, it's important to have the same machine. So from the same company, you have multiple of them, but like keep it consistent because then your life will be easier. You can just buy spare parts. You can have it's easier to service, easier to control. But so learning lessons, right? Like I didn't think about that in the future. I was like, okay, wait a second, how am I going to repair the machines? How am I going to do the long term? It was just like, oh, it's only $1,000 on eBay right now. Like, let me get it. Like it's half off basically. So I was like, okay, that's pretty cool. But at the same time, like I got to use again like 8 different machines from 4 different companies. So I really
Okay.
understood what companies did really well, what certain machines, what was terrible design, what was good design, and I had favorites and then like terrible machines as well, right? So it gave me an insight into kind of the 3D printer design.
Okay. Hmm.
So like how these different companies to change they have different approaches to design.
Mm-hmm.
calibration. They do different things, even user interface. Like some of them had really fancy displays with a
Okay.
really easy to use. Others was like you have to really click, like down a list and then you click again. Like it was very like time consuming, right? So yeah, just it gave an insight to me, and then I worked with that. And like I'm still in university at this point, right? So I'm doing this part time, and I'm working. I'm studying it at the university. So through the university, we designed some 3D printers, so for competitions, and we won a few awards. Everything was like, well, the first year we entered, we won best business case, and the second year was like best technical score, and then the third year was something about like overall design. So it got better and better, but it was just like interesting to see that happen. And I'm not a mechanical engineer, right? So my thing is materials. It's more like plastics, more like steels, and like fabrication of materials, basically for you to use and make something else. So just getting the insight into like looking at that, like contributing, like this is what should happen. This is what these are some good features. These are bad features. Working with mechanical engineers, it was kind of interesting to see how product development happens, right? So it
Yeah.
was like a different perspective, but yeah.
Makes Yeah, no, makes sense. And listening to you, sorry, yeah, my dog is over here and he's really big. So, but yeah, listening to you, I was thinking about the different possibilities that you had, because if you knew how to repair like all the models and you had different models, then you can have set up a shop to repair like 3D
Yeah,
print.
that's so that actually did happen. I think there was a company in the U.S. that
Mhm.
started. I think it was 3D Print Life Network or 3D Life Network or something, where basically they realized that like a lot of people have 3D printers,
Mhm.
and like once it breaks, people don't like bother fixing it. Like it was
Yeah.
just like either they can't do it, they don't know how,
Mhm.
or it's just too much work for them. So they like, okay, you know what? I use it for a little bit. I don't need it anymore. Like I'll leave it there. And it was very common, not just for like individuals, but also companies. Like I remember working with a few companies. They came to me because they bought this like really expensive machine,
Mhm.
but then it broke or it doesn't work really well.
Okay.
And they still need the part, so they come to me like, "Hey, we need this part. This thing that we bought didn't really work." And I was like, "Okay, cool, good to know." Like $10,000, 11. They're spending like $10,000, $15,000 at that point. Like these are like expensive machines, and it didn't work for them. So it's like, okay, like good to know. But yeah, so like the idea behind this other company was that you could hire technicians in your city to come to your house, repair the machine for you, and then you pay them like an hourly fee, right?
Okay.
So more like you have technicians for your washing machine or like
Mhm.
a plumber, right? Like same kind of idea.
Yeah.
But I don't think it really took off. I just think
Okay.
people like they didn't do enough marketing to make it aware to people.
Okay.
So I don't know what happened for that company that launched, but I did sign up for it
Oh,
because I was like, yeah, it's pretty cool. Like, I can go and repair machines. But I know that there were companies like in the city that were just selling plastics. Like that was a business model.
okay.
People were doing that. It's like you buy the plastics from, I don't know, usually I think it was China at that point because it was super cheap.
Okay.
Or you have, and you also started to see some North American plastic manufacturers because they realized the plastic from China is not the best quality. There wasn't really a quality management system. It's like you get plastic. It's like, what's in there? Plastic. You don't know if it's like recycled. It's like, what kind of coloring or chemical agents are inside,
Okay.
eh, and that's kind of mind-boggling. Was that once you learn that even the coloring that's used in the plastic can make a big difference in the part.
Okay.
So you can have the same material, but if it's a different color, like that changes everything.
Whoa.
Yeah, so like it was important to kind of keep consistent because like if somebody was using a part and it's they want to break it or something, and if you have different color, like it's different properties, right? So um, kind of interesting to know at that point. So they started to see more North American plastic manufacturers, but so you had these shops in each city who was selling, just supplying vendors, right? So selling machines, selling spare parts, selling plastics, repairing machines. So there was definitely a different business model that was um, in that kind of field, like supporting other businesses. But the problem with that is, again, you have to spend thousands of dollars on equipment, on stock, right? And you have to do it full time, and you have to have a space to rent. You have to have a shop location. You have to, pay a bank for the credit card machine. Right? So it's a lot more it's more of a regular business, but it takes a lot more investment, right? And also like your capital for growth, like you're limited to that local area, right? Like unless you do e-commerce, but again, e-commerce was like a lot more challenging back then. So,
Okay. Okay. Makes
but
sense.
yeah.
Makes sense. Makes sense. No, that is really, really interesting. So, yeah, so now you are at this moment where you have some machines and then you're making some revenue and then you're moving on. So time passes and things are not going well and things end up finishing. So tell me a bit
Yeah.
about how things ended and about the failure that you had, that you.
So I think the kind of point was like point of so it was going up, right? It's a roller coaster. You're going up to a certain point. It's going really quickly, right? So you're getting more machines, you're getting more clients, more money coming in,
Okay.
and then you like hit the point where it's like plateauing. So you
Mm-hmm.
start seeing it. For example, I think it was interesting for me that in the summer month, people weren't buying a lot of. There weren't a lot of clients.
Okay.
I think it's just like because of the businesses. Like most of our clients were students for working projects, other businesses were doing prototypes, and over the summer, like
Mm-hmm.
not many people are working, right? It's like vacations, and you would not see like maybe like two or $300 or something, right? So it's very very low volume of revenue. Um, and I think I expanded too fast. So I had a lot more machines, and the capex on those machines, like I financed it through my internship. So I got another internship, and I saved some money over the summer, and I put those into buying more machines and expanding, right?
Okay.
But you start to see a point of like diminishing return where okay, like you put in too much money into it, and you're not seeing enough growth to like keep going, right?
Yeah.
So it's like saturated. It's like okay, you have enough, but you're still not growing beyond like what you want to grow.
Yeah.
Um, so I think at that point I realized, okay, this takes a lot more time. Like either I need to, get more money, open up a shop, like because you're competing against other vendors in your area,
Yeah.
right? So it's a price competition kind of thing. And one of the lessons that I learned is that you can't really compete on price. Like it's not a good idea. It works. It works in the beginning when you're first coming into the industry. Like you want to make a name for yourself. You give a bit of a discount. People come to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but long term, like this is when I started taking some entrepreneurship classes. I started learning about it in school a bit more. I started reading books on startups and like understanding like even Porter's five forces, being competitive, looking at rate of like return on investment, all these kind of things like they start coming into play. And you start thinking about it, it's like, oh, hold on a second. So if I have these machines, I spend this much money, I can only make so much money, but I need to put in this amount of time, and my competitors also like kind of access the market now. You start thinking, okay, like I have to find a way to differentiate yourself, and then so the way to do that is either you become bigger and you start like basically out manufacture the rest of your competition because you handle a lot more business,
Mm-hmm.
or you change your business model completely to make it much more restrictive. You focus on a very specific niche, or you specialize so that you're protected from the rest of the competition, right? So, but for me, it's like okay, like I don't have the money to basically grow, open an office, have 1,000, well, not 1,000, but like dozens of machines,
Mm-hmm.
and do like commercial clients.
Okay.
Um, and I didn't want to go into a niche specifically because like that takes a whole different skill set. Like you have to be able to not only use a 3D printer, maintain it, repair it, design for 3D printing, and also like program. I guess at that point to create a website and like make a storefront. So like that's a lot more like skills that I don't really have right now. So, and I mean also in school at that point. So I was like, okay, you know what? Like I'll finish my degree and then I'll work on this like maybe in the the future or something, right? Like if it ever takes off again. So at that point, like I came into the realization that I probably should sell the business.
Okay.
So I had different business partners as well throughout the venture,
Mm-hmm.
and the last business partner that I had, the idea was to basically sell him my clients. So
Okay.
I had a client list, give him the clients. I offered to sell him the machines. He didn't want to get the machine because he was building his own.
Oh.
So that was smart as well because like you can save on the cost of getting a machine. If you build it yourself, you have low cost machines. So that was like his way of like doing that business, like just starting your own business. Like he was doing basically building machines and then talking to clients, and so forth. But it was hard for him to join 3D Hubs because the network was already saturated. They were not taking any more vendors. So
Okay.
there was a benefit of me coming in early,
Mm-hmm.
because at that point it became a lot harder to join in the network, right? So they try to kind of limit competition. They try to make it more, you have to have professional machines,
Okay.
you have to do like quality management systems and like this kind of stuff so that to weed out the hobbyists, the creators, and just like keep the people who are there to make money. Because for 3D Hubs, if you can have professional vendors and they give you more business, the better for them, right? They're taking a percentage. So having like hobbyists who are like create low volume, but the quality isn't always reliable. Like it doesn't really work for their business model. So they push them out, and then you try to go with the professional route. So I think this was 2017, 2016.
Okay.
2017 probably, yeah. That's when they started to do those kind of changes. And so I was basically like, my benefit was that I had clients and he didn't have clients. So I would outsource projects to him, and then take a fee, when I have too many clients. And then eventually the idea was now to sell to him, to sell him my client list, and then to sell the machines. But he wouldn't take the machines, but he was interested in client list. So I sold him the client list, but just as we were selling it, unfortunately what happened is that the 3D hubs, they basically decided to stop working in Canada. It's just like unthinkable. Like, I know the Canadian market was small for them. Like, the US market for 3D printing was like, I think 60%, something crazy like that. Like worldwide, like all the 3D printing in the world, like 60% of the market was in the US, right? So that's massive.
Yeah.
Canada probably was like 8% or something, or not even 8%, like 4% or something, very small, right? Like, so tiny. But they basically stopped working in Canada. And then the reason was they couldn't figure out our tax system.
For real?
For real, yeah. That's the reason that they gave. I spoke with like upper management at that point. I was like, hey, like guys, like what's happening? Like you're just abandoning the entire country? Like, what do you mean you can't have like Canadian businesses on your platform? Like, yeah, you know what? We couldn't figure out the taxes. Our lawyers like just don't have enough time to work on this. It's too expensive. We can't do it. I was like, well, that sucks.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I was like, okay, like at that point, like it was a final nail in the coffin, because 90% of the business was coming from 3D hubs. Like,
okay.
Another danger was like, okay, if you're on one platform, like let's say you're a YouTuber, right? Like if 90% of your ad revenue comes from YouTube and you get, let's say, 3 strikes, or they demonetize your videos, then, or worse, they take off your entire channel, they delete your channel, then you basically lost everything, right? And so same thing with 3D printing was that, okay, if you lose your 3D printing, like 3D hubs network, like you now have to start from scratch. You have to go on advertising, you have to do marketing campaign, you don't have any of your old clients, and like there's a whole kind of, you have to basically start from zero again, right? So you have the capital infrastructure, but you don't have the business network anymore, right? So that's like kind of screwed at that point, basically. So that was the final nail in the coffin. It's like, okay, the business is over at that point, because like for me at least, right? For my business partner, like he could basically start, working in the local community and, kind of take it slower and go from there. But for me, I was like, you know what? I'm out. That's it. Like, that's the end of it. That's a sign, like, so I got out, I sold the machines. And then I started working at another 3D printing company. So the one that the old boss, his company grew a lot bigger.
Okay.
So their business model was to basically make a machine for companies that's you can print different materials and doesn't cost you $500,000 a year, right? So like it was a good business proposal, and they're still around. So I I worked with them for after that, and that's what happened.
No, that's really great and really interesting. Because of course, if you just, I mean, a lot of things happen at the same time. Like you were thinking about selling the business, and you sell not only the machines. I mean, you don't sell the machines, but you sell the your client list,
Yeah.
and then you get this notice from the other 90% of your business that they're
That's it.
closed down. I mean, and how did you feel, man? Like what was your reaction when you heard?
Well, so it's annoying, because like you spent 2 years on this platform and you realize that it's just business, right? So like it's cutthroat, like competition is real, right? And making sure that there's something called it's risk, right? It's risk management, and making sure that you kind of limit your liability, not liability, but your exposure to risk, right? That it's when you hear about companies like limiting exposure to risks, or like banks increasing their capital to secure loans, right? Like they're doing that because they realize that, hey, like if we don't do this, we could go under. And so the same thing for businesses is to think about, okay, where are your weak points? Like, okay, if your 90% of your revenue comes from this like one platform, what happens if that platform goes down? Or what if you get removed from the platform, right? Like, so you appreciate having the kind of planning for risk and for uncertainty.
Mhm.
And so at that point, it was really upsetting to see that, even though you're a vendor, you've been them with them a long time, ultimately the power was in their kind of court, right? Like they chose who's on the platform, and who you can sell to, and how much money they take, right? Because there wasn't much competition, and I think still even to this day,
Mhm.
3D Hubs is probably still the monopoly in the 3D printing network. So if you probably go in, type in 3D printing, like online or something, you're gonna see 3D Hubs as the first thing, and then maybe you see like um, Shape. What is it? I think there's like Shape Factory or something. There's another company in the U.S., but they just do like business. Like if you have a business, you have a design, you want to sell those to your clients, they basically take care of the manufacturing for you.
Yeah.
But they don't do like prototyping, that kind of stuff. So 3D Hubs is kind of interesting in that they took over the market, took over the world,
Yeah. Interesting.
and they still don't work in Canada. So even now, like 3 years later, like they still haven't figured out the tax
Haven't
system.
changed. Yeah, exactly. The taxes have not changed, so that's why they want no business there.
Yeah, and you know what? That's another thing. Like it's really important for business, for governments, really. Like okay, like as a student, like you're not really involved in politics. Like you don't pay taxes that much, that kind of stuff, right? Like you don't really like care about elections or government at that point. But like when you have a business, you're like, oh, like this sucks. Like why is it so hard to make a business here in Canada, right? Like or in a province, because like what happens is you have federal tax, so like for the
Okay.
entire country, and
Okay.
then each like province
Mm-hmm.
or each region they have their own tax, and it's different,
Ooh. Okay.
right? So like some provinces you only have 5% tax, other provinces you have 15% tax,
Okay.
and you have to charge according to the client and it in the province. So if somebody's from a different province, they have to charge them that percentage. But if you're different province, like it's complicated, right? So
Cool.
and then registering a business is complicated. Like it's not like Estonia, where in Estonia apparently you can register a company online within 30 minutes. Like
Yeah.
it's everything is online. You're done. Like you have a legit corporation at that point.
Yeah. Yeah.
In Canada, it's a lot more complicated to do that, and you start seeing like, okay, this is why it's challenging, and this is why, like people say, there's red tape, and you understand, okay, the red tape, like you start seeing it. Because like you have to understand, okay, like there's a lot of financial things you have to understand how to file a tax report, not just for individual but for your business, how to handle the taxes, like for like there's different taxes specifically just for businesses where you take 50% from the customer and
Mhm.
you have to hold it and then give it to the government. So like
Okay.
there's like special things that you have to do, right? So it's complicated, especially when you're starting out new and it's a new business. Like you have to understand all of that, and or hire an accountant, but an accountant was expensive at that times. But like,
Yeah.
that's another tip, is like make sure you have an accounting system, because taxes are complicated.
Definitely, man. Yeah, I believe that is one of the biggest fears many entrepreneurs should have. Like, have an account,
Taxes.
have
Yeah.
yeah, have someone help you out. I mean, even if
Yeah.
you don't have the budget, like at least call a friend that knows how to do it, because it is really important.
No,
And
absolutely. And I think
mhm,
it's important to maybe take even a class on just like accounting. Just like
yeah,
how do you create a budget? How do you keep track of your expenses?
yeah,
What kind of apps do you use? And now it's gotten easier because like you have these like apps on your phone, on your website. You can basically just like you have an accountant, like virtual accountant in that sense. You track your expenses, and then at the end of the year, you can just like print out something to show you an overview, much like an income statement or a balance sheet. Like you can have that created for you, right? Like
yeah,
it's gotten a lot easier, I think, and it gets easier every year, I think. From you have companies that do that for you.
fully. Like,
Yeah.
yeah. All right. So yeah. So now you got this call from this people in Holland, in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
And they tell you this, oh, hey, we're closing the business side on Canada, so you're losing out, and you had to shut down. And that was like, as you said, the last nail in the coffin.
Yep.
And who was the first person that you called to speak about this, and how
Well,
that
I think
conversation well? Mhm.
so. It was probably my business partner at the time. So the
Mhm.
person I was selling the plan list to was like, "Hey, got bad news." Like basically, they just shut down. It might be temporary. And so at that time, it looked like it was temporary.
Mhm.
Obviously, that wasn't the case.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I was like, you know what, this is the situation. Like that's just how it is. And I basically we talked about how it's important for him to basically work with local clients because, and it has this thing like it wasn't actually a terrible thing for him that 3Hub shut down because he didn't have access to the network. So
Mhm.
as a right, because like now the competition became more fair for him because everybody starts from zero again, right?
Yeah.
Unless like you had your own clients from before. So in that way, and then suddenly people who want to get things printed, they have to find a different company, right? So
Mhm.
in Canada, because what was happening is like if you want to get something printed, you would have to get it from the U.S. So it would be much more
Right.
expensive. It didn't make sense, just like the shipping itself.
Yeah.
Like it didn't make much sense, and then it's in U.S. dollars, so like the exchange rate also factors in.
Yeah.
So if you had a Canadian company who could do it for you faster and cheaper, you're gonna go with a Canadian company, right?
Of course.
So for him, I think it was like all things considered, it was actually a blessing for him in that sense. It was a good start because at that point you have, it takes a little bit more investment, and then it kind of like moves the competition because now you have to have your own website, you
Mhm.
have to have your own marketing,
Yeah.
um, and you need to do some SEO, like Google, that kind of stuff, campaigning, and most people like who were at that level, like they didn't take that next step, and everybody started from the same level at the same time. So it was kind of a reset on the market, right? So
Makes sense.
there was benefits on that. So it wasn't terrible news, but it was like bad news at the time. It was like, whoa. And it was like we used to joke about it. It's like, oh yeah, Canada, like if imagine like if 3D House stops working in Canada. It's like it's like a yeah. And I was like it's unlikely. And then it actually happened. So
Yeah.
but yeah, it's crazy.
What did you do to overcome the emotional feelings? Like, what did you do to take care of yourself in that matter?
Yeah, so I mean, running a business is obviously very stressful. So, like, I think another thing is like you have to basically have a lot of stress coping mechanisms.
Okay.
It's important
Hmm.
and healthy ones too, right? So you want to have healthy stress coping mechanisms because there are, there's different ways to cope that are unhealthy, obviously. But so healthy ones would be like obviously, meditation. I think is really important, and
Hmm.
that's kind of like reflecting and taking that kind of step to go through that is important, and making sure that you're starting off from a good place of mental health anyway, because like when you're going into business it's going to be a lot more stress, right? So you're it's going to take an effect on you both, like physically you're going to be tired, but also mentally you're going to be exhausted, and
Yeah.
so just making sure that you're in check and in balance um, is really important, I think. And part of that is meditation. Other thing is good habits, like making sure you're eating, you're sleeping, and you're going out of your home, taking walks, that kind of stuff, right? It's actually important because like it's not just like you work 20 hours, like that doesn't work that way. Like you can't work 18 hours, 20 hours, and you can't do that for a long time. You burn out or you get tired of the business, and then you don't want to ever do it again. Um, right? And so I've I've seen different entrepreneurs around the world, and I think a lot of them, they take exercise, they really take their diet and that kind of stuff very seriously because they realize that okay, um, it's something that you're competing on, right? Like especially if you're an entrepreneur, you're doing a lot of different things at once, and you need to be at like 100% to compete on a day-to-day basis, because you are the company, right? So, I mean, even when you're like, even if you hire people later on, like you're still going to be doing a lot of the work because it's your kind of project.
Yeah.
So I think that's the really important thing. And then it's also have to have a network, right? You want to have a network of friends and supporters and family to make your life easier and to help you through the kind of journey. Yeah.
Definitely, and common thing of the people that I have spoken with is exactly that, like having a support system around you, like friends, family, people that you can go to, and they
Yeah.
support you no matter what. So that is
Exactly.
really really important.
Yeah,
Um,
and then I think so. The other thing I like to realize that,
mhm.
and goes into planning and also like just making sure that again you don't fail so badly that it ruins you, right? Like if you're not taking out a loan to buy $100,000 machine without starting out small with like $1,000 machine first, and then like doing things. You want to have a parachute without holes. Like you don't want to be, you just don't want to fall to the ground that fast. Like it's all about slowly falling, right? Like surviving
Yeah,
after you jump out of the
not
plane in that
flying.
sense.
If you
Yeah,
like.
or
That,
flying or whatever you want to do, gliding, whatever else. But
yeah, exactly.
the idea is to not hit the ground too fast.
Yeah.
Because you might break a leg or you might even die, right? If you hit the ground too fast. And so it's important, like when you're taking out these businesses, for example, with 3D printing, it
Hmm.
would have been very, it might have like seemed very attractive to go buy out the newest, most expensive machines. But hey, like, what about the business case? What about the return on investment? Like, how long does you have to work to pay back the machine cost? Like, there's these things you got to think about, and you just want to make sure that you're not starting out from a place where okay, now you're not only the company has failed, but you have $100,000 debt,
Yeah.
and then you don't have a job, and then you have to pay rent, and then like other things, right? And like other stress factors, if you have a family, like that's something to consider about, right? Like how do you feed your family? So there's a lot of different things you got to consider, and so for me personally, like I realized that okay, like as an effort, if I do this venture, I try it out. Worst case scenario, it fails, but hey, I'm pretty young, like 20. At that time, I was 20 years old, so I can still find a new job. Like I'm not running into debt right now. I don't have a lot of leverage, so it's like what, I'll try it. And that's what it is. So like I tried it out. It didn't like it worked ish, but it didn't really work out, so it kind of failed. It's like
Yeah.
okay, cool. But at the same time, like you're going into it that 9 out of 10 businesses, like they kind of startups, like they fail, right? So like everybody goes into it like I'm special, like I want to do it differently.
Yeah.
But it's a statistic where you're looking at it. 9 out of 10 businesses fail, and they fail by the mean that they don't really hit their potential or
Exactly.
they close completely, right? So
Hmm.
um, there's that. But so there's ways you get around it, like planning and making sure that you don't fail terribly, kind of minimize your risk, right? And I think that's a really important to do when you're starting out. Is start out small. Um, or like save a bit of money and then start, or like have people finance you.
Yeah.
Again, that's the danger with people financing you, is that you're then reliable on, like you're accountable to those people, right? So like, if you don't pay them out, like so make sure you're not taking like huge loans, but something reasonable at the same time is important. So
Oh, yeah.
just making sure that happens. Yeah.
Definitely, definitely, and so this is really interesting because many of the things that you have told me today, it made me think about other new industries and other perhaps new technologies that will come in the future, and
Yeah.
other technologies that in the past revolutionized how we lived, and how many businesses started on the same track. Like, hey, this is the new thing. I'm gonna jump in. I want to discover what's going on, and many people face like similar situations. So what would you say to people in the future or even in the past who might face similar situations with a new industry?
I think it's important to really use the technology. Like it's important to be one of the first people to use it, because here's the reason. Like if you're one of the first people to actually use a 3D printer, if you know how it works, if you know what it can do, you're in the 0.01% of the world who's done that. Like
Yeah.
it was super rare to find anybody else who's used a 3D printer. So
Mhm.
you suddenly have a really big advantage
Mhm.
when it comes to companies or employers or even starting your own business, because you've used it before,
Yeah.
right? That's where you have like early adopters. In that kind of sense, you're going to be the early adopter to the technology. Um, and I think what's important then afterwards is that you start looking at the applications. And sometimes the only way to figure out the applications is you play with the technology, right? So you try it out, you do a small investment, you see what you can do with it, see if you can make money with it. You look at what other people are doing. And then I mean, if you really think about it, you can plan out somewhat what the future kind of potential companies could look like. Worst case scenario is that you're one of the only people who knows how to use this thing,
Yeah.
and you get new skills, right? Because like once you learn something about, like, let's say 3D printing,
Hmm.
you realize that there's a whole different like skill sets for each part of 3D printing. Like one
Yeah.
is how to use the machine, another one is how to repair, how to design a machine, how to make your own machine, how to use CAD software to like design 3D parts. Um, Programming for the firmware and the software application side. Even like you have companies now that specifically just do client management for 3D printing. So they analyze the part, they choose a material, and then they give you estimates for printing time and like material cost. And like basically it's a website, like a platform for your clients to go and upload their files, and then for you to manage their invoicing, payment, to make sure the part is actually printable and that kind of stuff, right? So there's a whole industry around that itself.
What would be like a main takeaway that you would like to share to our listeners today?
Okay, how can I take what I learned and make it into something that's beneficial for the rest of the society, right?
Yeah.
I think that's where entrepreneurship comes along. Is like you find something that you can be helpful with. So
Mm-hmm.
with 3D printing, it was like, okay, we're helping companies prototype, right? So they don't have to spend thousands of dollars and wait 6 months to get their products done.
Yeah.
We're making that much faster and easier for them. And a lot of people can benefit from that. The economy moves faster. Like if you can make new products really quickly, that gives you, you can do a lot of bad ideas and find that one good idea, right? And then I think so. Doing a business, you start to realize that okay, even as an employee, like what value do you bring to your company, right? Like it's not just like you're doing this 9 to 5 job and then like you're done. Like no, you think about okay, so I'm doing this, and this is like part of this bigger business, and then we're serving these clients. How do I personally make this company better by, you start thinking about, okay, like I'm getting paid this much money and bringing in this much clients, or I'm doing this and the value of that is, that. So you start thinking about how do you bring in value. And I think part of that, like being an entrepreneur gives you that kind of insight. You're no longer just an employee. Like you've been the CEO, you've been the CTO, you've been, the chief financial officer, you've been all of that, right? And so you can kind of see their perspective. And I think the most important thing was that for me, like you start looking for answers for things like, okay, how can I do this better? Understanding that like the growth mindset is important. So like there's different ways of making money. I think people need to realize that. And then with the wealth inequality that we have, it's important to be a creator, not a consumer.
Yeah.
So whatever you're doing, like you try to consume less than you create, and that's hopefully that leads you to build wealth over time, right?
Yeah, of course. Definitely having that change of mindset, like if you want to create, if you want to provide value, you need to become a creator, like consume less and create more. I do believe that is one of the things that we will be seeing for our further years, like in the future, that everything is
Absolutely.
going to be focused on that. So thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your story and
Yeah.
this amazing conversation. And again,
Thanks for having me, Samuel.
yeah, and the courage that it takes to really move forward and really focus on this strategy, and then take all their experience as a learning process, and that thing that is really admirable. Like not many people find that way. Not many people face that, and many people jump out of the plane, crash down, and they just like don't recover from that. Like they just move to other things and don't do this process about talking about it, speaking about it, or having that emotional support that someone has them, and that is really hard to.
Many new businesses start to generate income from one revenue stream, bringing some peace to the founders' minds who are seeking to make their business profitable. But this proposes a challenge many founders don't acknowledge that can potentially kill the business. When this happens, founders' minds start to get comfortable with that revenue stream, reducing the need for finding more revenue streams and making them less worried about the cash always coming in. This is extremely important because businesses are naturally unpredictable, and we as founders don't know when that revenue stream is going to stop bringing in some cash. I am not saying that you shouldn't work on this revenue stream because at some point it will stop bringing in cash, but I'm saying to diversify, find more ways and more revenue streams that will make your company profitable. For example, Kodak suffered a big blow when the digital era changed the need for printing photos. BlackBerry lost its market share against a disruptive technology. And for Zapaer's 3D printing business, losing the revenue stream that brought in 90% of the sales was the final nail in the coffin for his startup. If you're starting a business or have an ongoing business, please take the time to analyze your revenue streams. Identify which of them bring in the most cash and take care of them. Also, think about strategies to mitigate the risks that unique revenue streams might propose to your business through finding different streams that can help you grow your businesses and reduce your chances of failing. Thank you for watching. Our goal is to help founders see failure from a different perspective. If you like this episode, remember to like the video and let us know in the comments what have you learned from failure. Are you interested in learning more? You can check our Patreon for exclusive content and subscribe to our mailing list for weekly updates. You will find the links for that in the description of this video. Remember to subscribe to our channel to receive notifications when we publish new videos.